Hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. My name is Ravi Verma. I'm a professional Scrum trainer with Scrum.org. I want to welcome you to today's Scrum Pulse on Agile metrics with Don McGreal. Before we get started, I want to tell you all a little bit about Scrum Pulse, what Scrum Pulse is, and what we are trying to accomplish. So it's a free webinar by Scrum.org. We try to stick to a monthly or a bi-monthly cadence. It's completely community driven. So we get inputs from our community on Scrum.org's Scrum Pulse, and that's where you can suggest topics that are relevant to you. And based on the topics that get the highest number of votes, we get speakers, and that's how the schedule is driven. Also, in case you're not able to attend any particular episode, we make the recording available free of cost. So it's available on our YouTube channel. So that's another way you can get caught up on past episodes or future episodes that you cannot attend live. There is a unifying thread that runs through all our Scrum Pulse episodes. We want to use these webinars to increase the focus on empiricism and agility. We want to continuously deliver business value to our business partners. And last but not the least, we want to share some tips and tricks and ideas that will help us continue to build the trust and respect between business and IT. So that's a little bit about Scrum Pulse. Let's talk a little bit about logistics. Some guidelines. Your microphones are going to be muted throughout the session, but there are lots of ways in which you can interact with us. If you have questions along the way, please type them in the chat window. We also encourage you to use social media, so you can tweet your questions. Make sure you mention the handle at Scrum.org and use the hashtag ScrumPulse. So we are going to be monitoring the Twitter feed, and as questions come along, we'll be adding them to the backlog. And depending on the flow of the webinar, we might pause maybe in between to catch some questions, and then we will have a Q&A at the end. So with that, I want to tell you a little bit about our speaker, Don McGreal. He's one of the people who inspired me to become a professional Scrum trainer. I learned so much from him every time we interact. Don is VP of Training Solutions at Improving Enterprises. He's the co-founder of TastyCupcakes.org, which is an awesome site if you are curious to learn Agile games for your teams. Don's got 20 years experience in the software development industry, and he's played a variety of roles from developer to BA, project manager, and so on. And he integrates that diverse experience every time he trains coaches and he consults. So with that, Don, I'm really proud to introduce you, and please take it away.
Thanks a lot, Ravi. You forgot that maple leaf up in the corner there. I'm also Canadian, but I've been living in Dallas, Texas for the last 15 years now. And it's a very important thing about me. So I'm a Canadian and a Texan. So let's just jump into it. Agile metrics is a often talked about topic in our community. A lot of misunderstandings. There's some people that just come out against it completely, saying every metric is a bad metric. Others that use too many metrics. So we just kind of want to, in this session, just sort of break it down. Let's define what's good, what's bad, why are some good sometimes and bad on other times, and we're going to kind of at the end sort of show some examples of ways of tracking these and using them and getting the most out of these things. I do also, I'm very used to delivering this type of talk with people around me in the room, and I do like engaging the audience quite a bit. I like getting there. I like doing activities, games, like you might see on Tasty Cupcakes to do this. So I'm going to try my best with the webinar to keep you engaged. I'm going to be asking you questions. I may not hear your answer, but I want you answering that, even if you're just talking to yourself. So try to answer them so that you can play along the way. If you do have any questions, type them in the chat window. We'll be collecting them. Certainly at the end, we'll have time to answer some of those questions. But I'm probably going to break somewhere in the middle as well, just to sort of see. So any questions you have early on, please type them in there. and we'll get to them. As many as we can, anyways. All right, so on the screen is my information. If you have any questions after this, please feel free to contact me any way you like, with Twitter, LinkedIn, or old-fashioned email. Any of those will work. I'd be happy to share some of the tools I show you along the way and to continue the conversation. Here is our agenda. We're going to start by looking at different types of metrics. We will then discuss some of the issues we have in our industry with metrics and some of the dangers with them. We'll talk more specifically about software development metrics, and then how we gather, how we apply them, how we make the use of these metrics. I'll show you some different techniques and tools I've used along the way. And then, like we said, we'll spend some time at the end with about 10-15 minutes for questions and wrap up and stuff like that. All right, so I like to start with this question. Think about how you measure progress on your software projects right now. Think about it. What are some things you use in your team? Do you use anything? What are some of those things? Are you thinking about maybe velocity? That's a common one in the Scrum world. Or number of defects, number of tests passing. How about budget? Is that one of them? What about value? Now, if I were to ask you what about value, is it any different than progress? Do you think about it any differently? Are there separate metrics to measure this? How do you know your customers are getting the most from your product? So that's kind of what we mean by there. Sometimes you'll see here customer satisfaction, or you might see on time, on budget, things like that. So what I aim to do is kind of define these and kind of draw a line between the different types of metrics. This is a definition of value. The regard that something is held to deserve the importance, worth, or usefulness of something. And that's a hard thing to quantify. How do you know it is in high regard, that something is valuable? When you bring it to the types of products that we do, and for organizations, it gets a little bit easier. For companies, it is always presented in money terms. It's profit derived from the use of a product or service. Now, if you think really hard about all the companies that you guys work for right now and the types of things you're doing, every product that you're working on is about making money or reducing costs. It's always the dollar amount. I have to upgrade a system. Well, why? If you just keep asking why enough times, you'll get to the dollar answer. Why do we need to upgrade this system? Well, it's going to save us time later on. It'll reduce costs. We'll invest now, but our ultimate goal is to reduce costs. Otherwise, why do we bother? I want to add these features. Well, why? Well, our customers want it. So why? Well, we'll get more customers, or they'll use us more, or they'll pay for these other features. So it should always come down to money. If you work for nonprofits, it might be a little bit different. If you work for government, nonprofit organizations, money is certainly an indicator of value. Like how much money you bring in for your charity is certainly one, but it's not the ultimate. It's not the end goal. Reduce cases of homeless people, right? That type of thing might be the ultimate measure, but how much revenue we get in, or how much we can reduce the cost, is a good indication of that. So that's the only difference from a value perspective. So I just wanted to get that out of the way right away. And I want to take you right into this world. Imagine for a second that all of us on this call right now work for a pizza chain. It is a medium-sized pizza chain. It's in all around the greater Dallas-Fort Worth area. That's where I live. And we have maybe a dozen stores around here. But all of us right now, we work for the delivery organization. We are made up of delivery drivers. We are made up of order takers. We're made up of managers as well in the different stores, all focused on getting those pizzas out the door. But we're on the delivery side. So here's my question. What kind of metrics would you care about? So think about this. You're part of this delivery organization. What are you thinking about? What kind of metrics? Here's a few. And let's see if some of yours are on this list. Pizzas delivered per trip, how much time it takes us to take an order, how much time it takes us to go deliver one, how many miles we drive per delivery. When I do this interactively, I get all kinds of different ones I haven't thought of before, like number of orders per trip could be one, cost, fuel used, or I get one that's accidents caused, incidents, accuracy of the order, efficiency of the route we're driving, orders per driver, all that kind of stuff. And you could probably think of a few others as well. Sometimes I get quality of the pizza, that kind of thing on here too. But these are just this is a subset of metrics. So these are fairly easy to come up with, and most people can come up with them pretty quickly. But what I'm going to ask you to do now is switch hats. You're not part of the delivery organization anymore for the pizza place. You actually own this pizza shop. You're an owner-operator of this pizza shop. We all are. Now, if I were to ask you, what metrics do you care about, what would you tell me? Think about that one for a sec. I assume you're all thinking of revenue and costs, right? Profit is probably one big one. But what are some other ones? Here are a few that I have. And again, you may have come up with all kinds of other ones, but here are some common ones that you would probably agree with. We've got revenue, obviously, and investments costs, but then also customer satisfaction. I do get customer satisfaction on the left sometimes too for delivery metrics, because you're handing them out to the customers, and that's fine. Some of these can sort of span the different areas here. But repeat customers, the delivery people probably don't really care as much about repeat customers, but this is a very important metric for the owner. If they can increase repeat customers, then that's a good sign for increased revenue growth. Employee satisfaction is another big one. How happy are the employees? Because we're going to have to retrain them and bring them in if they're leaving if turnover is too high. Growth. Market drivers and trends, market share. Market drivers and trends could be, what are the latest ingredients, what's new, gluten-free, do we need to get on that bandwagon now? Our competitors are doing it. Let's look at what our competition is doing. What are some of the big events that we need to prepare for? Super Bowl is a big pizza time. Any big sporting events? Valentine's Day, maybe? No, probably not that one. But these pizza metrics on the right-hand side are very much about value, are much more about value. The last one's market share, which is another important one. If I find that our organization's increasing market share, yet our revenue is going down, that could tell us something else. If revenue is just going down, it could be bad. But if market share is increasing, that could mean that the rest of our competition's dropping at a higher rate. And when we get out of this slump, maybe this economic slump, we'll be much better off if we can stay with it. So, anyways, these are a bunch of different metrics. So, how do we define them? What's the difference between the left and the right? Well, a great way of looking at this is using these terms. It's like legal terms here: circumstantial versus direct. The things on the left are important. They are kind of good metrics to follow when you're doing the work. But these are known as circumstantial metrics, just like circumstantial evidence. My fingerprints might be on that knife, but does that mean I actually did the stabbing, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that. But if you have videotape of me doing it, that's much more on the direct side. So all of these metrics fit somewhere on this spectrum from left to right. It's not like one or the other. They're somewhere along the spectrum. I would say for the pizza chain, revenue might be right at the tip. Profit might be right at the tip. Increased revenue is still a little circumstantial for better profit. But revenue, cost, repeat customers, market driver, all of those would be sort of on the right-hand side of that arrow, the direct side. Whereas all the things on the left are much more circumstantial. So they might be indications of value, but the further they are to the left, the further they are away from real indicators of value, and that can cause a lot of issues for us moving forward, and we'll talk about those. So that's pizza. Just sort of to put it down there, I like this example because we can quickly put ourselves in one hat or the other. It's very easy to come up with metrics on the delivery side and on the owner side just by asking you to think about it in different ways, by putting yourselves in their shoes. So this means really nothing until we get to software. So from a software perspective, what if we did the same trick? On the delivery side, that's also why I like pizza, because it's about delivery, and then software we deliver too. So, but we also have these delivery metrics on the left-hand side. So think about it, same side. You're in charge of getting software out the door. You're building it. You're taking in requests, taking orders in, getting this stuff done, and getting them out to your customer, just like in pizza. So what are some of the metrics that we measure in software? Think about it for a second. We've mentioned a few of them earlier, things that you probably wouldn't be too surprised with here on the software side. So velocity, how many tests we have, how many tests are passing, code coverage, which is a common one for the delivery organization. How much of our code is covered by tests? A number of defects. You can do coupling and cohesion metrics too. You can measure the complexity of your code. There's all sorts of ways of doing that. How many failures in the build? How many check-ins are we getting per week or per month? And can we reduce that? Or even process adherence. I hear it all the time when I talk to customers. They're like, hey, great news. When we started a year ago, only 10% of our teams were doing Scrum, and now we're up to 90%. Well, that sounds good, but does that mean you're actually delivering more value to your customer? Do your customers really care? I mean, you tell them that, and they'll be like, well, okay, but where's my stuff? It doesn't really mean anything to them. I believe in Scrum, and I've seen a lot of teams see a lot of success with it, but it is still circumstantial. It is not the end goal. It is not the end game. So process adherence is one common one, but it's very much on this left-hand side of delivery metrics. Velocity is another big one, right? And you say to your customer, hey, great news. We just increased velocity by 22 points. But what does that even mean, really? Do I get my stuff any sooner? Did you fix my problem? Am I going to make more money? It doesn't mean anything to them. Does that mean there's no value on these things on the left? Absolutely not. But they're not designed to show value. They're not designed for the business. They're not designed for the customer. They're designed for the people doing the work. And then, so again, if you swap hats here and we went to the owner metrics, again, I kind of like this owner thing if you think maybe from a product owner standpoint, but from the product owner and their stakeholders, anyone on the business side, what do they care about? What do they want from a software perspective? Is it possible to come up with some metrics that are consistent between different projects? Granted, I'm sure there are some that are going to be very specific. Well, there are things that would be very specific to a product, but there should be some that are consistent across, and we'll talk about a few here. What about revenue? How much revenue is your actual product generating? Do we know that? Is it important? It may not be important for some products, but this is something we should be looking at. For every release, how much revenue increase did we have? I've worked on some products where my business was able to tell me expected revenue for every single product backlog item on there. That's a rare thing to be able to do, but it's extremely important when you can make that visible. And it really helps in organizing your product backlog. How about investments and costs into this product? Or actually the costs of doing business, or the users of the product. What's the cost? How many people do we have using it? Can we decrease that? Customer satisfaction, employee satisfaction are on this side. Lead and cycle time are kind of related, but basically it's from the time the customer asks for something, how long does it take us to get it to them? Slight difference with cycle time. It's when we start working on it, how long does it take to get it ready for production? So you'd like them to be the same, but they rarely are. And then another one you may not have heard of before is innovation rate. What percentage of the work we're doing is based on maintaining existing products, fixing defects, and just keeping the wheels on the car, versus new innovative stuff. This could be as simple as counting the number of items in a product backlog and seeing how many are maintenance items versus new, or looking across a portfolio to see how many of our projects are maintenance projects versus new. And then you could sort of equate that to your budget as well. A common statistic that's out there is that it's like well over 60% of IT budgets are against maintenance. So imagine if you could tell your customer that at the beginning of the year, only 20% of our budget went to new items for you. But now, here we are a year later, and we're up to 45% of our budget are going to these things. That is an indication of value. It is on the right side. Still a little circumstantial, but much closer to value. And then finally, customer usage. This could be as simple as how many people are actually using the site, how many hits are we getting, to measuring how much time they're on this. A lot of the Google Analytics stuff if it's a website, but just really finding out how they're actually using the product. Are they using the product like we expected them to? Once again, things on the left are circumstantial, things on the right more direct. So I kind of just want to draw the line, because too many of these debates come down to one side or the other. Metrics are bad, metrics are good, but it's just simply not that easy. So let's just define what it is we're talking about here. Some are good, or they're all good. They all can be good, but some are used for different reasons than others. The things on the left are important, but they're not for the business, like I said. The way I like to see this, the analogy I like to use is the people on the left are driving the plane. They're the pilots. And those metrics on the left, that's their cockpit. I don't know if you've ever seen an airplane cockpit, but it's got hundreds of dials and buzzers and all lights and all sorts of stuff that gives the pilot information and measures things, and they can adjust and work on. But that information's for who? It's only there for the pilot. It's very important for them to give them feedback so that they can get us there on time and safely, which is probably what the right side would be for an airplane. Would be, what do our customers care about? Being on time, safe, from an organization probably with reasonable costs as well, not too much fuel. And so those are the main things that we're trying to measure, but the pilot looks at a lot of other things to see that, in order to achieve that. But they're not for anyone else, they're for the pilot. The more you tie these things to other issues, then the less you can trust these metrics. And that's what we're going to get into here. Oh yeah, and this slide here this is a picture I found years ago just browsing, and or it was tweeted or something, and I've been just dying to use it in a presentation, and this seemed like the perfect place. This is the only real direct evidence metric that exists that is 100% direct. The pie I have eaten versus the pie I have not. So this is like the perfect pie chart right here. I can't hear you, but I'm sure you're all laughing like crazy. Probably not. I've done this in public a few times, and I find it a lot funnier than most people. But I'm still going to use it. So what? Why do we care? What does this even mean by being able to define a left-hand side for metrics and the right-hand side, direct versus circumstantial? So when thinking about this, I came up with three different reasons, three challenges that we have in our industry about this. And the first is efficiency. When you're not paying attention to this stuff, if you pay too much attention to the left-hand side, and those are the only metrics that you have to guide you, then the danger is you end up with a cargo cult mentality. Now, some of you may have heard this story before, but I'll say it anyways for those of you that haven't. Back in World War II, in the South Pacific, the U.S. military took an island that was populated by these people that hadn't had any contact with the outside world for who knows how long. They didn't have any technology or anything. So for them, they saw these planes landing. They built a runway there, and they built a tower in this very strategic island. This was all amazing stuff for them. They'd never seen anything like it. The U.S. military would drop supplies on this island, and then the natives would get to them sometimes before the military if they wouldn't land properly. And if it wasn't too harmful, then the military would just let the natives have it, and they'd open it up, and it'd be like food items, Coca-Cola and M&Ms and great things like that. Well, after the war, the U.S. military cleaned everything up, and then they left the natives alone, and they went away. But 30, 40 years later, researchers went back to the island. I believe the story is they were just flying over it, and they saw what looked to be a runway and a tower down there. So they landed to go see what was going on, and what they had found was the natives had recreated everything they saw back then. A tower, planes, a lot like in these images here, but they weren't usable. They just recreated everything they saw, and the question is, why did they do that? These are generations later. It's some people doing this, marching and all that stuff weren't even around back in World War II. So why were they doing it? You probably guess that they figured by doing it, by recreating everything they saw back then, that the gods would send them more Coca-Cola and M&Ms out of the sky. And what that means is they were just reproducing things they saw in order to achieve value. And we find we do this a lot too in our world. We follow these processes. It happens with Scrum too. You're meeting every day for 15 minutes, and you have stickies on a wall and all that, and you start to wonder, well, why isn't software popping out of the sky? This is cargo culting. This is a cargo cult mentality. These are all tools that expose it, but we still have to do the work necessary. And if circumstantial metrics are our main guide, this can lead to more overhead and waste and more cargo culting. Then we worry more about how do we get our code coverage up. We worry more about velocity and focus on how many points, and we spend all this energy on getting exactly right how many points we're supposed to put on these things. We find ourselves arguing over whether something was technical debt or not, and whether we should get credit for it, and all this stuff around it, and we lose sight of the real reason we're here, to deliver value. And so efficiency is one big part of this, is that you waste energy on these things, on gathering stuff that really doesn't matter that much to the business. And that's a big issue. So if circumstantial evidence is your main guide, it can lead to more overhead and waste, or cargo culting. So that's the first one. The second is vision. There's nothing better. There's no better set of metrics than a scoreboard for a team. It's got, here, I guess this is football here, American football. We've got the score, we've got how much time is remaining, how many downs, and all the information that the team needs to see, okay, what do we need to do next to make a plan and to align themselves. There are other metrics in the game, but this scoreboard aligns them, making it visible and showing it and looking at it and coming together to figure out what to do next based off of this information is key. Each individual, like the star receiver, may have their own statistics, their own metrics that they're gathering, and it does help them a little bit. But it is circumstantial. If my star receiver has a record-setting number of yards and catches and touchdowns, is that indication that we won? It's a good sign, but does that necessarily mean we won? No, that's circumstantial evidence. So a scoreboard, by having these things visible, are very important. And in my experience, so many of the development teams out there don't have visibility into this. They're not seeing what is it that we're actually trying to do. And when we do see it, we don't see it enough. When you don't release very often, these numbers don't change much. And so it doesn't really help. But if a team is releasing all the time, wouldn't it be great if we could show them the actual value that they're bringing, even if it is lagging a little bit? So that's the scoreboard one, which allows us to focus a little bit on a shared vision. Using circumstantial metrics as your main guide can misalign the business and the delivery organization. A classic example of this would be, a project manager who has their bonus dependent on whether they finish on time and on budget. And there they are with about 2 months left in the project. The business comes in and says, look, something's changed in the business. We'd like to do this now, XYZ. There'd be an inclination on the project manager's part to say, you know what, this is good information, but we're almost there. If you start changing scope on us now, we're not going to make it. So please, can we just buckle down, finish this, and then we'd be glad to look at that stuff. And it seems perfectly reasonable at the time, even from the business perspective. But we're not aligned. We're not motivated by the same thing. So the vision isn't quite there. We're not trying to, we're not looking at it and saying we're not really a trusted partner with the business. And then finally, incentive. This is an example from think we show this in our professional Scrum product owner course. This is and it's a link from Robert Austin's book, Measuring and Managing Performance in Organizations, where when you use measurements for incentives, metrics for incentives, what you think is going, when you start looking at these metrics, what you think might be going on isn't really what's going on behind the scenes. This is a direct quote from it. Once a measure of performance is made a target or incentive for the purpose of driving behavior, it loses the information content that qualifies it to play such a role. And I see this all the time. I've seen organizations say, hey, we're going to give, the PMO is going to schedule a meeting with any team that varies their velocity by 20%, not just down, even over. We want to help, in quotes, I have air quotes there. We want to be able to help. We want to be able to meet with you to see how we can help because your velocity was off by so much. Just something that subtle is enough incentive to make that velocity number no longer useful. And that's an important aspect to this. What do you suppose started happening to my customer where that happened? All of a sudden, we no longer saw plus or minus 20%. They were all right in the middle, which means velocity was not a good indicator anymore for them. They didn't allow them to be able to inspect and adapt properly because velocity was no longer value neutral. And that's the key thing for the circumstantial metrics on the left. We want to keep them value neutral. We want to make sure that everybody realizes these are not indicators of value. The things on the right are, and so we want to keep them neutral so that we can adjust them and see what they really are. If velocity was halved in a sprint because the team had a dependency on some other team, not their fault. They worked their butts off but couldn't get it done. They couldn't really complete some product backlog items. Is that the team's fault? Absolutely not. If they felt it was going to be their fault, then they're going to start fighting and wasting a lot of energy on this. And I would totally understand too, by trying to get the credit necessary because it wasn't their fault. I'd rather not even spend the energy on that and say, yeah, we only got 20 versus 40 points this sprint, and here's why. What are we going to do about it now? Everybody, not just the team. It is not an indication of value. So that's the incentive piece. And there's some classic examples of the perversion of metrics here, where there's a story about a town in India that had a big cobra problem. And what they ended up doing was the townspeople, the government introduced a reward, a monetary reward for every dead cobra that the citizens could bring in. So they enlisted the help of everybody in the town. And if you could guess what started happening, if you thought about it enough, you probably would. Before you knew it, cobra farms started popping up left and right. People started breeding cobras, killing them, and then bringing them in to get their rewards. And the cobra problem went way out of hand. It was worse than ever because of it. So that's an extreme example, but this is the type of thing. As soon as you put incentives around something, you can no longer trust it. And I've seen it as simple as a well-meaning Scrum Master saying, hey, if you meet your goal this sprint, we'll take you to lunch. You know, the team can afford their own lunch, but it's that pat on the back was enough incentive for them to really start pushing back if anything weird happened in their sprint. And they'd be all worried just because they wouldn't get their free lunch. And so just keep that in mind when you're putting these sorts of incentives in place. And the incentives on the left by far are more prone to abuse than the ones on the right because they're easier to game. They're easier to change. So who tracks these? Who are, and you've probably thought about this before, so from the pizza perspective, who are the delivery metrics for? They're for the people building the pizzas. They're for the people delivering the pizzas. They're for those managers. It's for them to do their job better. And the owner metrics, they're for the owners. Easy enough in our pizza shop. What about in software? What would happen if a product owner or a product manager came to a team and said, hey, my stakeholders are asking for some progress reports. I need to give them something. I need to tell them how things are going. What can I give them? And if that product owner hasn't done the work necessary to figure out what is valuable to them and what those metrics are, then all they're going to be left with is the stuff on the left. So imagine they come to the team and the team goes, I don't know, but we track this stuff. We have velocity, we have code coverage, we have defects, we have that. Will that work? And the product owner might go, sure, if that's all you got, great, I'll take that. And then that gets pushed up to the different ranks, which starts this whole process of unsatisfactory metrics because we're using the wrong ones. So if the business doesn't supply metrics, then you're going to end up with the more circumstantial ones, because that is what the delivery teams are working with. That is what's valuable to them right now. That is what they measure to do their job better. And it's kind of like asking the pilot, hey, I need to measure how this flight is going. What do you got? And then the pilot just sort of points to the cockpit. And I got all this stuff. You guys want to show that? Showing that to your customer, to the passengers, isn't going to help much. So the key here is we need to help our product owners become more like product managers. Somebody somewhere figured that this was a project worthwhile. Why? Why are we doing this project? What is our goal? What are we trying to achieve? By how much? By when? Those are questions that we must be able to answer. And these metrics on the right should help us with that. What I might do now is do a little pause and see if there are any questions that might be out there. I'd be happy to answer if you maybe a quick little break here before I continue with the next half.
Yeah, Don, so there's one question, and it's probably a very common question many of us get. So let's say once we deploy our product to production, maybe it might take 3 to 6 months for us to move the needle on business level metrics, the direct metrics like revenue or so on. Until those lagging indicators start shifting, what advice do you have for people to explore or to identify leading indicators that are more on the business side, so that they don't fall back and start tracking velocity as a leading indicator of whether revenue is going to move or not?
Okay, good. I'm going to show some real examples of this coming up, but that's certainly a key thing. And because they're so lagging, unfortunately, I find a lot of our teams just say, well, that's not good enough. Let's not bother then. But that is important. Even if it is 3 months later, it's extremely important to show that when we release, here's what happened 3 months later. Especially in these larger projects, that's not a long time to wait. But so let's not let that be an excuse to stop tracking them. Can we have leading indicators that are also on the right? Most of the metrics on the left, the circumstantial ones, are leading. Not all. Some of those are lagging, like maybe process adherence or code complexity and stuff like that. But the things on the right, not all of them are lagging. Some are leading. And it depends how you do it. Like or I guess maybe satisfaction could be lagging, but lead and cycle time is something you could find out real quick. Innovation rate, same thing. Customer usage, same thing. So what if we took the things on the right and divided them up? So that let's focus on the lead value metrics, the lead direct metrics, and then also measure the lagging ones. And hopefully we'll start to see a trend. I expect as your lead indicators get better that the lagging ones get better. But if they don't, we've got some serious conversations to have. And that's important that we do sooner rather than later. Another big piece of advice is that if you're only releasing once a year, all of this is going to be very difficult. You're not going to be able to budge the things on the right. There's only one way to deliver any value, and that's to release. Otherwise, it's all a cost. You're investing, you're investing, you're investing. The only way to get a return on that investment is release. So everybody must be aligned. And I think these types of things, these metrics, if I have a team saying, well, what do we have? We don't have any say on the things on the right. We can't change those until we release. Well, that's great. I want them thinking that way. So then release. Figure out what do we need to do in within our product to get us to a point where we can release more often. More release is more value. And less lag as well because of it. So yes, some are lagging, but there will be some leading ones too. And I'll show some examples of that coming up. Good. Was there another question, or? That's probably good for now then. So let's move on a bit. This
No, I think we'll catch the rest of the questions towards the end, Don. Thank you.
Sure,
Yeah.
perfect.
Thanks.
Another thing I wanted to point out here, this is from some of the evidence-based management work that Scrum.org has been doing and around scaling as well, but with Agile adoption, this is something we don't think of enough. Too many people see Scrum as a task management tool. It is a project management tool to get stuff done. And that's not the case. It can be that, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. If you have a team that's able to produce potentially releasable increments every single sprint, imagine what that could do from an organizational standpoint. That's what we need to be focused on. So imagine that Scrum is the engine. If you look at this little diagram here, it's the engine in development that produces releases that go out to the marketplace, which gives us feedback and allows us as an organization to respond to that. That's the real value of Scrum and of Agile adoption in general. So I guess this little side thing is to say, when you do an Agile adoption, if an organization is moving towards Agile, they tend to just measure things like process adherence, how many people are doing Agile. But what does that even mean? Why are we adopting Agile? We should really know. Are we doing this for more sales? Are we doing this for better customer satisfaction? What is it what reasons are we wanting to adopt Agile? That's the way you're going to be able to communicate with the people in the organization that will be funding this. So these metrics can help guide your Agile adoption as well. Throughout up and down the organization, not just from the delivery organization. So just keep that in mind too. Much of this is based off of, they end up calling this evidence-based management, off of evidence-based medicine, which was introduced a while ago in the medical industry when doctors were relying too much on their experience. They would look at symptoms and go, oh, I've seen this before, and start diagnosing people, and a lot of times they ended up wrong. So they started putting policies in place, and this is the evidence-based medicine approach where even though your experience tells you one thing, you cannot proceed to the next step without evidence, without real metrics, without real data to tell you that. And that dramatically improved the rates of misdiagnoses out there in the medical industry. And that's the type of thing we're trying to apply here too, is that when you're doing an Agile adoption effort, how do you know what your next move is? How do you know what to do next? And these metrics give you some of that indication. Lagging or not, it gives you a direction to head later on. And with EBM, evidence-based management, there's more, you can find out more on ebmmgt.org or from the Scrum.org website if you click on management. They've sort of broken it down into 3 categories of metrics: value, current value, time to market, and ability to innovate. So if we looked at these, current value, most of these are probably lagging. Revenue, product cost, and employee customer satisfaction. But then you've got time to market. This is probably a little bit more leading. Release frequency, release stabilization, cycle time. Release frequency might be how many times did we release in the last quarter or in the last 3 months, and measure that every so often. And then release stabilization, once we say we're ready, how long does it typically take before we're actually in production? These can be leading metrics. And then innovate, installed version index. If our customers are on like 10 different versions of our product and all our releases are just going to the latest one, that's going to affect value as well. So what can we do to measure that and to make sure everybody starts to get on the same one or gets the value quicker? Usage index, like I mentioned earlier, innovation rate I talked about before as well, and even defects. The more defects we have, the harder it is to focus on new things. So with that in mind, we started coming up with ways of how do we show this? How do we look at this? And I've tried several things with my customers in order to make this work. I'm just going to move on here. Things like the way to track metrics. This is a radar chart where I measure all of these sort of things, and this comes from Agility Path, which is under the EBM umbrella as well. But this wasn't as effective for me with my customers because it shows we do reviews every once in a while to measure this, and the goal is to get out on the extremities of this. So I tried different things. I thought this is kind of handy. This is big on the lean side of things, but cumulative flow diagrams that really measure lead time and cycle time. But you can also do this with Scrum and other products. I don't think we use enough of this to really show the length of time it does take for our customers to get something that actually works. Another thing I've had good success with is this is an actual burn up for a release that I've done with a customer. And every star is a release. So there's 3 releases for this, and it's across 6 months, these 2-week sprints. And we're measuring velocity, which is only a measure of progress. It is not a measure of value. It's circumstantial. But what if I started thinking, what if I started overlaying some of these things? I used to track them in other places, but what if I overlay the sales numbers on top of this? And where I can see after the first release, a few sprints later, the sales started to go up, but it's not necessarily, indicative of it's because of that release. The second release, there was a huge jump. All right, I'm feeling better about these releases, but it's still a little circumstantial, but I think the business would really like this information. They can decide from there if this is worth the right investment, which also leads me to the next piece, which is, do you guys know how much your sprints cost? What is our cost? This is not a hard number to come up with. Even if it's just based on your people, there's probably other costs too, but even if you could do it based on your people, what is your cost per sprint? This is an essential thing for your business to know, for product management to know. So if we're spending $50,000 a sprint and the sales are jumping by that amount, is it worth it? Is it the worthwhile investment? And this is what I want my business to consider and to see. And maybe it isn't. They pull the plug for the good of everyone, except maybe the contractors on the team. But this is an important metric that they need to be able to balance. They need to balance the value in with. And then in this example, I also showed employee satisfaction. So everything was looking pretty good up until we overlaid this one, where, yeah, in Sprint 10, we did some great things. Well, we released in Sprint 9, and that was key. And in Sprint 10, we saw a huge spike in sales. But look what happened to employee satisfaction. What happened there? Maybe they were getting overworked, but we should certainly investigate this. What's going on? This is something we need to be able to focus on. So imagine being able to overlay the metrics on the right while you're showing the progress with the metrics on the left. So all of this got me thinking, because I used to do this stuff, but I just kind of make it up in PowerPoint. And I'd have different Excel spreadsheets, but nothing was really good. So I started with influence from a specific book that I'll talk about here. I came up with this. This is my scoreboard. And if you think back to the example of a scoreboard and a sports team, I used a scoreboard analogy as well. It's the same thing. What is a scoreboard that we could look at and everybody could sort of get on the same page by looking at it? And this is what I came up with. And I'll kind of walk through it a little bit here. Whereas at the top, the blue part is progress. Everything else is value. So the metrics on the left, I only show on the top part. I also put this thing at the very top. This is a goal that we should be able to achieve. This is the vision of the product. What are we going to change? By how much? By what date? Could be change sales by 25% by the end of the year. Something like that. If we cannot come up with this, if your business, if your product management can't come up with this for your product, that's an issue. We need to be able to have something that we're all focused around. That's the score, right? That's what we're trying to, that's the goal of the game. That's what wins this from our scoreboard. We need to achieve that. That's your wildly important goal. And that wording specifically comes from a book called The 4 Disciplines of Execution, which kind of fits in a lot of the work that I've been doing with evidence-based management and working with teams. It kind of fit quite nicely with this, where they talk about 4 disciplines of execution, where the number 1 is focusing on a wildly important goal, coming up with that, and in that format that I have up there is from this book, change, buy. And then acting on lead measures, which we'll talk about here, and was kind of brought up with the question as well. And then keeping a compelling scoreboard, which is what I was trying to build right there. The 4th one's a little out of scope for this, which is creating a cadence of accountability. But the first 3 really fit nicely with this talk and with this thing in particular. So what I did was I put progress on here, like scope, defects, velocity, on there, but I kind of minimized it. I have another tab that can make it a lot bigger, but this is just where I put it, so we still want to be able to see it. That's progress. It's circumstantial, and I put it at the top. The vast majority of this is focused on value, where on the left-hand side, I have the lead value indicators, and on the right-hand side, I have lagging. So on the lead ones, I'll get to the cost one in a sec, but if you look at time to market and innovation, The time to market numbers, much like the evidence-based management categorizations, are around how many releases per the quarter, how many weeks does it take on average to release, and then our cycle time. And we can measure this over time. So you can see this particular one, we started releasing 4 times per quarter, and release time went down to 1 week by the 8th iteration. And then at the bottom is innovation. What percentage of our backlog is in maintenance versus new features? And we obviously want more new features than maintenance. And so that's starting to grow up to 52%, which is a huge jump from 23. On the right-hand side, we've got lagging indicators. This is where revenue comes in, but also customer satisfaction, employee satisfaction. Customer satisfaction may not change for a while after we make a release. And sometimes employee satisfaction might be a little bit more of a lead indicator, but not necessarily much more. I'll get to the custom one in a sec. But here, I kind of wanted to show, I wanted to focus on return on investment a lot. So I put it here in the form of lead money numbers and lagging money numbers. So on the left-hand side was project costs. This is where we measure how much money are we spending. In Sprint 5, we hired a few more people, so costs went up. And so we measured that a long time. We also see our budget on there too. How much have we spent and how much is remaining of our budget? But these are our lead indicators of it. And then on the right-hand side, you've got product revenue. How much money is our product making? And I like showing that in contrast with how much we're spending. How much money are we making, or how much are we saving in costs? Sometimes I'll just show one or the other. It doesn't always make sense to show both depending on the type of product. But I can show that every step of the way, and which would probably be much more lagging on that right-hand side. And then finally, we've got custom. Leave a space here, and I have a separate tab where you enter all this information. Nobody should ever touch necessarily this tab, but in here, you've got custom ones. So if I'm measuring sales, I could put another graph in here. Or how much time it takes to process something. I work with an organization that did audits. So their products were about reducing audit time, number of audits they can do, and then how long it takes them to complete an audit. Or how many support calls we get in a week. Our product might be to reduce that, or how many users we bring in. These are all things that are going to be very specific to your product that are value indicators, which ultimately mean revenue or reduced costs, but they might be important to put in there. And sometimes we might want to put it a little bit higher, make it more of a focus for teams. But this sort of allows us to have a scoreboard where we're focused on the right things. Not just business. I want the team looking at this stuff too. So you see how it ties back to the evidence-based management groupings. So that was a big inspiration for it. The 4 Disciplines of Execution book was an influence for it. And just working with my customers who have this sort of nagging need to see this stuff, where all I could do is sort of give them funny PowerPoint presentations where I throw things together from other metrics that I'm gathering separately. All this kind of brought me to this need for a scoreboard that you saw there. So kind of to wrap up a bit here, agility isn't just for IT. It can provide the business with a true competitive advantage. We have to start thinking more than that sense. It goes well beyond IT. This is by doing it, Scrum even, we need to be able to tie that to what's in it for the business. And the right measures are essential for this. They can improve communication, productivity, and business alignment. Those are the 3 challenges we talked about. So more efficiency, better vision, and then better incentives. And the other part of this is that they can help guide your Agile adoption effort. How do you measure the success of your Agile adoption if not for the items on the right? So that sort of sums up everything we went over today. And again, here's my information. We're gonna pause for some questions here, but my information's here if you want to ask any more questions, you want to tweet me or link in or whatever. I'd be happy to talk about this or even show you more of the scoreboard. But for now, I think I'll hand it over to Ravi.
Thanks, Don. That was a really thought-provoking session, and we might have time just for 1 or 2 questions. So if you haven't already sent in your questions through the chat window or through social media, please do so now. And while we're waiting for the questions to come in, maybe I'll ask one question here, Don. And if your question is not answered, I hope you're going to reach out to Don because he's got encyclopedic knowledge in this topic, and I'm sure you'll have a very meaningful conversation. So, Don, one common question is, I coined a new phrase based on the example that you just said, the dead cobra metric. So if we are measuring, we don't know if our metrics are dead cobra metrics or they are value metrics. Do you have any facilitation guidelines, or what steps should we follow to classify these false or misleading metrics and separate and identify the true value indicators?
Probably the number one thing that made the dead cobra metric bad was the fact that there was incentives around it, right? That they put money associated with it. I think dead cobras would be a great metric if your goal is to reduce the number of cobras in there, but it needs to be value neutral. Number of dead cobras doesn't necessarily mean less cobras, right? So I think maybe as one measure, we could be measuring how many ones we kill, but we can't associate any incentives on that. But then the value one, I would say that the ultimate metric here would probably have been number of cobras found, right? Or something like that, or number of bites due to cobras is probably like, what I would ask why. Why do we want less cobras? What's wrong with cobras? They're pleasant. We'd want to ask why we want to get rid of cobras, and it'd probably have something to do with people dying, people getting sick, people getting bit, or stock or livestock getting killed. Let's measure that. Let's find the right ones by asking why. Just ask why. There's got to be a reason. And then start measuring that. Because then if the number of dead cobras goes up, but the cases of people getting killed by them go up, then that's a bad thing, right? We need to investigate why. Maybe now they're going after them more and they're getting hurt more. That's not good for society. We need to rethink it. So let's think about the real end goal more and make that our. If I had to build a wildly important goal for that cobra problem, it would be, I want to change the number of deaths by cobras by 85% by the end of the year, right? Something like that, and go from there.
Very cool, very cool. So it's kind of like what Peter Drucker said, what gets measured gets managed. If we are measuring the wrong things, we're managing the wrong things and losing sight of the end objective. So I'm afraid that's all the time we have in terms of questions. Like I said, I hope you will continue the conversation. With Don, we have his contact information here. And before we wrap up, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Scrum.org. So these webinars are organized under the umbrella of Scrum.org. Scrum.org is a mission-driven company, and it exists for one mission: to improve the profession of software development. And the vision that Scrum.org has, the one that unites all of us towards a common goal, is a world in which all software developers love their work and our customers love working with us. So this is a big, hairy, audacious goal. It's a very inspiring vision, and we need all the help that we can get. So there are multiple ways in which you can join our community. We have about 130 professional Scrum trainers throughout the world. We would love to expand our trainer community. We have active engagement platforms like ScrumPulse. We have discussion groups where you can communicate with us, share your thoughts, and help us inspect and adapt the nature of our industry so we can continuously get closer to our mission and to our vision. So with that, I want to thank you for attending this webinar. I hope that you will share your thoughts about what topics we should cover in the future and spread the word with your friends and colleagues. And check out our YouTube channel so that you can catch the recordings of past sessions and future sessions. And with that, I want to thank Don, and I want to thank all of you guys for listening in. And have a good day, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are.
Thank you, Ravi, and everyone else. Bye.